Okay, so good morning, everyone, again. So I'll just start things off with a little bit about, some of you may or may not know who we are, so just a little bit about CertiKit. We are a producer, a leading creator of compliance toolkits and provider of ISO services. The company is headquarters down in Derbyshire in the UK, and myself and a colleague, we're sort of location independent, providing services to CertiKit. The company's been going since 2010, and we've helped more than sort of 4,000 customers globally achieve compliance. And they've used our toolkits successfully to help them towards that. We specialize in doing ISO standards compliance and data protection compliance, and our toolkits are specifically around some of the core standards like ISO 9001, which is quality, 27001 information security. We also do other toolkits to support environmental, for health, safety, and GDPR. And our mission really is to make compliance easy for more organisations to benefit from, achieving certification in their chosen standard. So that's a little bit about who we are. A little bit about me. I'm Joe Lawrence. I'm responsible for providing internal audit consultancy for 27001 information security management to new and current CertiKit customers, and providing guidance and advice when needed to customers who are implementing 27001 using our toolkits. I'm a lead implementer for 27001 and lead auditor, and I've sort of worked over the last 25 years in sort of quality management in aerospace and defense sector, and also in the last 5-6 years doing information security management. I'm also a Six Sigma black belt as well, which I'm doing process improvement work. So what will we cover today? The main steps are, in summary, we'll just go through what the 10 steps are at a higher level, and there are sort of not just 10 steps to this in total. There are sub activities as part of these steps, and we'll just sort of briefly walk you through what those are. So every journey has a start, and in the beginning you wouldn't sort of do a project without planning it. So step one really is the fundamentals of identifying what the project's about, what you need to do, what you need to achieve, what the standard requires, that sort of thing, and work out how you're going to implement the project. Next step at the high level is determining the scope of your activities. What do you want to apply your scope to, and who are the interested parties who've got a vested interest in your management system, and also who you also subcontract out to, suppliers, vendors, and what those interested parties you require of them. So it's a two-way thing. Thirdly is policy, establishing the top level information security policy framework, and defining clearly the roles and responsibilities of those who have a direct and influential role to play as part of the management system itself. Next, the risk and opportunities. This is the core of the 27001 standard, really, is the risk assessment. And again, I've got a slide to cover what sort of activities go on as part of that risk assessment. And then once you've completed that, you can then work out the opportunities and information security objectives. Nextly, it's then to work out, well, what competence have we got of the core roles that are supporting that we've done in step 3. We've got these people highlighted, we've defined the roles that they're going to be doing, what competence do they actually need to fulfill those roles, and then if there are any gaps to do any training, and then working out what awareness do we need to do across the company. Like any management system, it's all going to be quite new, so there's a need to communicate that initially, make staff aware of, you know, the reasons why you're doing it. And then also on an ongoing basis, there's a need to establish awareness in information security topics on a regular basis. So that step there is working out how you're going to do that. Step 6, it's quite a big step of any management system implementation, which is the documented information. So this is the step where you really built all of the policy framework and everything that needs to support that management system. This is pulling it all together as a single documented system and hosting it somewhere. Now, a lot of companies choose tools like SharePoint as a good solution, or a document management system, or simply a structured folder system. So it's working out how you're going to do this and how best to move towards communicating that into the business. The operational side is working out all the procedural aspects that need to be done to support the management system. You know, for example, what does your IT department have to do in terms of their operational procedures, and what does the business need to do operationally to support that management system. Next is performance review. This is to do with establishing some basic KPI measures so that you know how well things are working within your management system. And there are some activities that the standard requires, such as internal auditing, and as well as doing a review of the management system periodically. Next, updating a gap assessment. So ideally, as part of the project implementation, I'll come on to, there should have been a gap assessment done, and this is really just sweeping up what what activities and actions are left. What do you need to do to then move on to making sure that you're compliant with the standard, dotting I's and crossing T's on everything before you then plan your certification needs. So they're the 10 steps, and I'll now just sort of go into a little bit about some of the sub activities and steps within those. So if we look at step 1, project implementation, it seems a basic question, but it's probably quite a fundamental one. Is why do you want to work towards 27001? What's the need? Why do you want to do it? Now, more often than not, I get clients that say to me, well, we want to do it because our customer has asked us to do it, and that's fine if your customers are asking that, but there's a lot of commitment to doing a management system. It's not just, oh, here's a certificate and just put a few policies and everything in place. If you really want to get the benefits of the management system, you really need to understand, well, okay, well, our customers have asked for it, but what can we actually get out of this? What do we want to achieve? And then there's other internally driven needs, like, will it actually help us to be more efficient and improve ways of working? Will it actually help us to reduce business risks? And could it reduce defects or incidents that impact the business and its reputation? So they're sort of the internally driven needs. But then, of course, there's the externally driven need itself. The most common one being it's a contractual requirement often from customers to certify. But also there might be an externally driven need. For example, you might become a target for cybersecurity threats or cybercrime, and you may have already been a target, in which case you've decided, well, we need to really do something about this to improve our resilience against these types of cyber crimes and attacks, which is becoming more frequent nowadays. Plus, each company varies as well as to whether whether you're a high profile target. I'm sure if you're Apple computers, you're going to be a high profile target, or a bank, for example, whereas a smaller organization might be less of a threat. But that doesn't mean that you don't work out how likely you are to be a target for cybercrime. The next step, get management buy-in. Can't stress this enough, really. If your staff don't see management buy-in, then effectively, why should they bother? Stakeholders could really lose commitment quite quick to support the management system if they don't see senior management supporting it and resourcing it. And without that sort of buy-in, you'll also find that if you're trying to deliver an implementation to a project, you'll find it difficult often to complete tasks because you're not getting the support when you want to drive and spend time and effort and resource putting the management system aspects in place. Next step is developing a project plan. I think, again, it's a fundamental thing that and a requirement really that no mature organization would even consider entering development or of a product or delivering services without planning what you're actually going to do. So similarly, the implementation of an ISMS requires you to plan it, ensure that everyone involved knows what tasks they are responsible for and when those tasks need to be completed, and developing a project plan that can be tracked so that you can see how far you're getting within the project as a whole. Now, one other thing that we recommend is establishing a steering group. Now, the size of a size and extent of it is really dependent on the size of your organization. If you're only a small company of 6 or 10 people, then a steering group might be a little bit of an overkill because you can pretty much just decide who are the key decision makers in terms of who's going to endorse and support the policy framework that you're going to be rolling out. However, we do recommend if you're a big organization, then the group really should be made up of key decision makers that are relevant to the ISMS, and those people really need to be the ones that can actively make decisions and have accountability for those decisions, and also be responsible for the resources and decisions on resourcing as you progress through the project. Next thing, communication. Can't stress this enough either, that in the early stages, change is scary. And everyone will probably be saying, well, what's this all about? What is 27,000? Never heard of it, So really, this is a chance to get some awareness out into the business, let them know what you're doing, why you're doing it. And also, I can't stress enough as well that senior management should be the ones that help to deliver this communication and awareness, because that then shows that their senior management actually endorsed the plan and they're actually committed to actually achieving that certification. Next step really at this stage of the step one is performing a gap assessment. By performing a gap assessment, you'll basically get a better appreciation of how much work will be involved in getting to the point where certification audit is possible. Now, I often get asked by clients, well, is it important? We've never done this before. We're starting from a clean sheet. Do we really need to do a gap assessment? And we still recommend you do it because, one, it gets you familiarity with the standard and what the standard actually requires. Secondly, as well, by producing a gap assessment, no company starts on a complete clean sheet of paper. If you've been in operation for a number of years, you'll already have processes for things. They might not be documented, they might be informal, but you will have processes. So it's, again, by doing the gap assessment, it's a good opportunity to say, well, we've got things in place here and we've got this. It might not be perfect, might not be what the standard requires, but we've got something. And by doing that gap assessment, it's a two-way thing. It helps you understand the standard and it helps you understand what you've got and where you are compliant and when you're not, and then that can then provide a focus on how you move the project forward. Step two then, scope. Again, I always, when I'm working with clients, I also stress about thinking very carefully about your scope and not try to, what I call the world term, solving world hunger. Try and scope your management system, and certainly when you're first doing it, to the critical areas of the business. So it's an important part of the ISMS. It has to be documented, but you don't have to do everything within the scope of your management system to start with. So early on, it's good to identify and draw a ring around what's included and be able to justify why you've not included certain areas. A good example of scoping things down is if you're a large organization, multi-site, multidisciplined, look at what each of those sites does and how critical those activities are at particular sites, and maybe just focus on one or two sites to start with. And then eventually, when you've tested the water, got your management system developed, you can then scope it out wider to other areas of the business at a later stage. And it's quite simple to do with your cert body to do that. Next step is to really then document that scope. It's a mandatory part of the standard to define the scope. It's so your cert body and the auditors know exactly what scope they're within the bounds of the assessment. Next thing is interested parties. These are people that really are the fundamental people who have a vested interest in and relevance to the management system. So who are these people? The short answer, it can be anyone. But as a starting point, the main interested parties to most organisations are typically your customers, legal and regulatory bodies, or those institutions that specify the legal and regulatory requirements upon your business, suppliers, staff within the business. And the main thing about defining the interested parties is understanding what their influence is going to be on the management system and what dependencies you have on them or they have on you in terms of the actual interfaces to your company, and defining what those interested party requirements are. Next, step 3 is defining the IS policy. The IS policy is should be your commitment to doing the management system and also to improving the management system and resourcing it. And once you define that IS policy, you can then go on to define then the roles and responsibilities of those that are involved in the operation of the management system. It's useful to develop an organizational chart, example here, but it doesn't have to be a reporting line organization chart. It could just simply be a chart that shows who are the key stakeholders, who are the primary and critical resources in the operational side of the management system, and how they sit within the organization. And then once you've worked out who those critical and roles are, it's worth then developing what we call an ISMS responsibility matrix. This is an example of one here where you sort of work out what those core roles are, what areas of the management system they have responsibility for. But the most important one for me is accountability. And so many organizations are very good at defining who's responsible for certain things, but they don't necessarily define who's accountable. And the difference between responsibility and accountability, and the definition is responsibility really refers to someone's duty to carry out a task to completion, whereas accountability generally refers to what happens after something has happened. So therefore, accountability is therefore concerned with the consequences of someone's actions. I mean, I'm sure many will put your hand up if I ask the question, you know, how many times have you worked for companies where they say, well, that's not my responsibility, or, you know, you've got a bottleneck happening and that bottleneck goes on and nobody will take ownership of it. Well, the whole idea of the management system accountability side is to make sure and say, well, no, you are accountable for that. That is not happening. So therefore, it's not anybody else's problem. It's your problem. And once you've worked out the responsibilities and accountabilities, you can then work out any development and training needs to go with it. Step 4, big area of the standard. This is all concerned with risk. So step 1 really is to define the risk process, you know, what approach you want to take. There are so many standards out there. There are formalized standards. I think it's ISO 31000 risk management risk standard. Or there's very simple. My advice is, if you're a small company, keep it simple. Our toolkit provides a spreadsheet and an example of a fairly straightforward risk assessment process. But there are various methods and there's no right and wrong way of doing it. And there's some very good tools out there as well if you're a big organization. But again, in my view, sometimes they can overcomplicate things a little bit. The main things you need to get out of the risk assessment is, you know, a sensible approach based on the size of your business. And the next step really is, what is your organization's risk appetite? You can only really make objective decisions about risk if you know what your risk appetite. If you're very risk averse, then when you come to look at assessing the risks for your organization, if you're very risk averse, then you may not accept certain risks, or you may not be accepting of certain levels of risk. Whereas if you're quite open to risk, then you're not going to be scoring things as severely, and you're quite happy to progress and accept certain risks where other organizations maybe don't. So define the risk appetite. Then it's about establishing the information assets that exist across the business. So these can be anything from IT assets, what information, data, documents, even staff, and evaluating, the effect that those assets and the impact those assets have within the business. The standard requires you document those assets in an asset register. So I always recommend doing that and then moving into your risk assessment once you've identified the assets themselves, because then you can do the risk assessment and identify what the threats and vulnerabilities are to those assets, and then make some treatment decisions, whether you avoid the risk or reduce the risk, maybe transfer the risk to a third party, or accept the risk. And as I say, the risk appetite is something you really need to work out first, because that will then impact your decisions as to whether you accept a risk or whether you're going to actually do some treatment or remedial action on those risks. Once you've done all your risk assessment, documented your treatments, you can then set some sort of high-level information security objectives. Some of these objectives may align to some of the treatments. So, for example, some treatments might be very quick wins you can do in a relatively short piece of time with very little investment, whereas other ones might be a longer-term thing, might require some resource, both financial and staff resource, to remediate those risks. And as a result, you might want to set some IS objectives around some of the longer term risks. Next step really then is to work out, for the roles that we looked at earlier, the key roles that are involved in the information security management system. It's then working out what are the competency levels required to fulfill those job roles. Now, Yes, everybody has a part to play in an information security management system, all staff, but the standard requires that for the key roles and the critical staff that we produce the organisation chart for, they're the ones as a minimum you need to define the competence requirements for. So this is all about defining what those competency levels are. Once you've done that, you can then identify, well, does anyone actually need any further training or development, or do they have those core competencies already? For example, if you define an information security manager, for example, is an important role and needs to be fulfilled. If that IS manager has, maybe certified credentials like CISM or CISSP, that sort of thing, he may be already very competent to perform that role. However, it might be someone you've encouraged or developed into that role, and that you might decide that to fulfill that role effectively, they need some further training and development. Next, ongoing awareness program. This is about putting together what you're going to do long term. It's all right, sort of, once you're certified, you've got your certificate on the wall. What you're going to do? Well, this is all about making sure that your staff have ongoing development, so regular testing. Lots of companies do things like phishing tests or cyber security awareness training, this sort of thing, just to make sure that people, the more you drill it into people on a regular basis, hopefully the message sinks in. Don't click on malicious links, don't do this, and sets those boundaries. And once you've done that, you need to develop the awareness program going forward. And then just sort of work out then what are the regular communication protocols and communications that are going to be done across the business, from periodically, things from town hall meetings, regular awareness communications, and that sort of thing. Documented information. This is probably the step in an implementation that takes the longest time, as most of all the documents need to be written, verified and validated before being signed off. So, and also once you've got all your policies and procedures and everything all documented and written, where are we going to put them? So you need to develop things like a document numbering system and categories for these things. A document control procedure, which is, how you're going to control all the information security management system documents and procedures, where they're going to live. Like I've said, lots of companies use tools for this, like SharePoint, or is it just going to be are you a small company, just a folder structure? So you need to work all this out and develop a document control procedure for that. And then on an ongoing basis, you're going to be developing the ISMS policies and procedures and uploading them and storing them and categorizing and controlling them in accordance with your document control procedures. Operational. At this point in the implementation plan, you really need to think about certain tasks and activities that will demonstrate the path you'll take after completing your risk assessment. So the standard talks about review and update and ownership of the risk and treatment plan. So you need to identify, how you're going to plan and review the frequency of those ongoing risk assessments, and define who's going to be involved. And also, as part of the operational side, it's working out how we're going to actually implement the controls. So we've done the risk assessment, we've got all these controls that we've identified that we need to bring into place. How are we going to actually implement those, and what procedures and supporting plans and things do we need to do to develop that? And then also at this stage, it's continue to build and develop your ISMS. You're not going to develop your ISMS overnight, so this is something that is going to be developed over a period of time and continue to evolve throughout the project. And then finally, defining actions to address external and internal issues and interested parties. So this is to look at the interested parties and their needs and make sure that all of those associated activities involved with that are swept up. Step 8, performance review. Mandatory requirement is to establish an internal audit program. The internal audit program can be as simple or as complex, depending again on the size of your business, but it's important to develop an audit program that covers off all areas of the scope, that includes all your policies, processes and procedures. Now, the standard does require that all areas of the standard need evidence of auditing before you proceed to having your certification audit with whoever your cert body is going to be. And then after certification, the audit program really should aim at auditing every area of the ISMS over a 12-month period. However, some organisations may choose to align their audit program over the same sort of period that the cert bodies do, which is like a 3-year period, and they say, right, okay, well, we're going to audit, say, critical processes more frequently, less critical ones over a 12-month or 18-month period. So, but ideally you should have a plan of how you're going to audit the various process areas and the various policies and procedures that form part of that management system. Reviewing the objectives. So this is all about making sure that you've got a mechanism in place for reviewing objectives. Now that can be done if you've got a steering group. One of the agenda items of the steering groups could be to make sure you keep your eye on the objectives, to make sure they're not just becoming stagnant, and that someone keeps an eye that they're being progressed. And also updated in terms of actions and activities. And also as well, there may be new objectives need setting when you complete some of the older objectives. So this is all about making sure new objectives are identified and recorded. Management review, again, a mandatory requirement of all of the ISO standards is that you perform a periodic management review. They don't actually say how frequently you should conduct them. My recommendation is, and again, it's only my recommendation, so don't take that if you want to do it differently, but my recommendation is when you're going up to certification and in around the first sort of 6 to 12 months after, I would do these around 6 monthly, just so that you've got built up enough evidence and review activity of your management system, and that everyone's comfortable with how things are going. And then you can then review the period that you do your management reviews at a later stage. But you must have at least conducted one, or maybe ideally 2, but certainly at least 1 before you go for certification. Corrective action. So this is the various policy processes around corrective action. So this would be, how do you deal with complaints or issues that your interested parties may feed? What about your internal stakeholders if people have improvement suggestions to make, or you've found audit actions and non-conformances with your management system? So this is having a process around how you deal with those corrective actions and how you record and follow up those actions. Step 9, if you've done a gap assessment, which I strongly recommended that you did at the beginning, this really is all about just going back over the gap assessment, updating it, checking that you've recorded off any compliance issues and any actions that needed to be addressed as part of that gap assessment. Check that any actions that have been assigned to staff are being progressed. So this is from anything really, from your corrective actions to your project plan to management review actions, and just check that everything is progressed or being progressed. obviously address any open actions and progress as much as you can. Get your 27001 implementation plan progress all updated and make sure everything that you identified as part of the project have been tracked and updated. Make sure that your mandatory procedures are all covered off. The standard has various mandatory procedures and things that it requires to be in place, like I mentioned audit and management review and improvement, those sorts of things. Make sure they're all documented and covered off. That all your risks are identified and any mitigation actions are complete and progressed. Make sure that the majority, or if not all, ideally, the management system documents are all issued and approved and as part of your document management system, whatever that may be. And that finally your assets list is updated and reflects any changes to any assets that since you started the implementation, because you may have brought there may be new information assets that come to light, or maybe you've bought some new equipment, or you've done some changes within the organization, so you need to make sure that assets list reflects any of those since it was first built. So once you've done your checklist and you're happy, then you're ready to start planning your certification needs. And this is really then selecting a suitable registered certification body, an RCB, who'll be in a position to carry out your certification audit later. I would recommend really that you choose your RCB reasonably early and start to sort of get to know them, and including, you know, when they're available and what their availability is and how much they charge as well. The sort of main things I would suggest to consider are the type of certifications they offer. Some certification bodies don't seem to have a reputation for being good in certain standards and less so in others. I can't actually say here who they are and what, but that's up to you to sort of work out, you know, do they have a big presence in a particular market or a reputation within a particular market? If you're in software development, you know, have they done many types of software type audits or whatever? So sort of get a feel for who your RCBs are and what markets they offer their certification services in, how responsive they are to your queries. You know, I've had clients have said, you know, well, we approached an RCB interested in doing an audit and we haven't heard back, which surprises me, but it does happen. And also the location and countries of their operation. Majority of RCBs have a presence in many companies, some more than others, but you need to check your location and the countries of operation. And one major consideration in selection of a certification body is really the certification costs and budget. Don't just think that a 20, you know, any ISO certification is a one-off cost. It isn't. It's a commitment. There are costs that are going to be involved initially with your certification, which is your stage one costs. As there's time to take, you know, that your own staff have to prepare for the audit, the number of days for the actual audit to take place, and then there's your annual ongoing audit costs. Typically, there's a major audit every 3 years. Use your initial cert, and then there's like what they call a triennial, which is your 3-year point, and then there's 2 years of surveillance audits in between there. So you need to factor in, you know, how much are they charging and how much are they going to be requiring in terms of number of audit days. Then at this point as well, it's worth doing a baseline audit and assessment to establish your readiness. This is important really before you actually press the button on going with your RCB. You know, you need to have some confidence that you are likely to pass the audit, and that you know you're doing good work, hopefully, to tick that box. CertiKit, we also provide a service to do this as well. And then obviously preparing for the audit. There's a lot of two-way communication with the RCB, which is putting a plan and a schedule together of who they're going to talk to and what areas within your business that the cert body wants to talk about particular topics and flavors, and so therefore preparing for the audit is going to take some time. And when you've done that, hopefully, if you've invited the RCB in and they've done, hopefully you'll pass an audit. So I think if you follow the sort of 10-step process, you should be in good shape to achieve certification. It's an approach that we use as consultants when we're working with our customers and clients on implementation. We know it works and it's in line with the sort of sequence of the standard. The standard is logically structured in the way it is because preceding activities feed later activities. So hopefully the 10-step approach should be a good approach to take. And again, our ISO toolkits should give you a head start in having the key documents that support your management system. There's nothing worse than starting on a clean sheet of paper and trying to think, well, what does the standard actually require us to document? And this is where our toolkits and toolkits in general will help to give you that idea of, well, these are a fully compliant set of documents that that will help you to achieve the mandatory requirements of the standard. So how can we help you? A little bit about, again, just sort of going about how we can help you in terms of implementation. Obviously, I mentioned before the toolkits themselves. They come with a full comprehensive set of documents that will meet all the various clauses and the policy requirements of the standard. If you've got expertise in-house, then obviously you can use those toolkits to help you develop your management system. We also have something called a logo replacer service, which is if you buy our toolkits, we can actually brand all of those standard templates up with your logos and your corporate branding as part of those templates. ISO consultancy, this is an area where myself and my colleague, we get involved quite a bit with working with clients to implement our toolkits and also to help them through this sort of like 10-step process, which is, as I say, the approach we tend to go through. And the ISO consultancy really is there to help organizations who want just that little bit of extra help and advice on how to implement and develop their management system to comply with the standard. And lastly, as a service, we also provide internal auditing. There's two aspects to this. One is we offer pre-certification audits where we can do a full audit of your whole management system. And then provide you with a report that effectively you can give to your cert body to say we've had an independent evaluation of our management system against the ISO 27001 standard. Or some organisations who are quite small, who don't necessarily have an internal QA team or compliance team, you may want to outsource your audits that need to be done. And again, we can help to perform some of those audits for you. Most of the service we offer is done remotely through Teams. So we can obviously dial in and, help to interview and perform those audits remotely. So that's how we can sort of help you. So that's the end of the sort of 10 steps process. So if you've got any questions, then either put them in the chat or I don't know whether we're unmuting mics for people to ask, but certainly put them in the chat window if you've got any questions, and we'll try and do our best to answer them. So thank you very much. So if there's any, I'll just end the slideshow.
There is a question there, Jerry says, does the certification audit have a pass rate percentage based on the gap analysis / statement of applicability?
Not really. What the main thing you do, your statement of applicability is built around when you've done your risk assessment, for example, you'll determine what the potential risks and threats are to the organisation. So from that, you will then work out which are the most appropriate controls or controls are the best fit to address those particular risks. Now, when you built your SOA document, that forms the basis that the auditor will look at that. He'll say, well, have you excluded any controls, and what's the justification why those controls are not relevant for your particular organisation. In terms of the assessment itself, obviously, you're going to have to comply with all the mandatory elements of the assessment, but no, there's not a pass score. It's not like a test. It's basically, are you meeting all the mandatory elements of the standard and all of that requires, and then it's up to the auditor to then judge how compliant you on it on areas he may have concerns with. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, we've got a thumbs up, so I think that was answered.
Okay.
We've also got another question that says, what are the main areas that you find small to medium-sized companies are most challenged in getting to ISO certification?
Small companies, I think they often feel a little bit overwhelmed by the documentation. What I would say is my rule of thumb, like anything, is keep it simple, stupid, the KISS principle. Don't over document, because over documenting is likely to open up avenues for an auditor to say, well, you say you do this, and so keep your documentation as lightweight as possible. Trying to think of other areas for smaller companies. I would say as well, I mentioned on the risk assessment side of it, don't overcomplicate things. Keep your risk approach relatively simple, straightforward. Don't make it a really complex thing and base it on some really highly complex scoring mechanism for that. Keep, again, KISS principles on that. The other challenging things for small organizations, I think, is balancing their time and resources as well to the maintenance of the management system. However, from my experiences, if you clearly define and document your management system well, and it reflects pretty well what you'll do as an organization, then you shouldn't really be having to maintain it very much. So you don't really have much of an overhead in terms of maintaining the management system. However, there are lots of ongoing activities that the management system does require the standard, like you got to do audits, management review activities, review your risks periodically. So again, don't overburden yourself by reviewing those risks too frequently, especially if you've got small numbers of staff. So hopefully then you won't have too many activities that are all hitting you at once, in addition to your, I'm sure, day jobs.
We've recently done a 20,000 implementation and have a lot of management system documents and lots of overlap. How is it best to implement both 20,000 and 27,000? Yeah. Two scopes seems like duplication.
Yeah. What we've got clients who we work with who we do what's called an integrated management system. So what I would try and do is map out where the overlaps are and do things once. You know, don't have a process to do one standard and another process to do another standard. Try and combine them as one single activity that ticks off both. We've got a client that we're doing 9001 and 27001. There's huge overlap between various areas of the standards. I mean, that's done deliberately. The ISO standards group who developed these standards with the Annex SL format deliberately did it, so there's a huge overlap. So my recommendation is where you've got common areas, do a level of integration and have a single process or method for dealing with where those overlaps are. Don't do two separate things for the two different management systems.
Okay, great. And then this one here is, do you need to number documents you create for ISMS as part of document control? We have levels of documents: confidential, public, external. We keep naming conventions simple with no numbering and storing on SharePoint.
Yeah. Again, keep it simple. Yep, have a very simple document numbering system, so at least each one's got a unique identifier, so at least you know that when you refer to a document you can refer to it directly. That's something like ISMS doc 01 or doc 02, whatever, you know, something very simple. Document classifications though, yes, you do need to classify documents, and my main recommendation there is make sure you come up with a convention, define what that convention and what your classification levels are, and make sure that you know, documents that should be protectively marked are marked accordingly.